G'day, friends, and welcome to another Writing Corner. Today, we shall talk about myths and realities of writing. As I go through my writing journey, I have often sought many days to self-improve, and I want to share my journey with you along the way. Before we get started, if you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe. Of course, YouTube, if you don't hit that notification, you will miss out. You do not get notified for subscribing. And even then, we know what happens. But anyway, of course, if you'd like to support your channel, links are in the description below. PayPal, buy me a coffee. And of course, you can follow me on social media. And g'day, Rumble. I am live streaming to Rumble. Of course, there's a delay, but it's working. It's a bigger delay, of course, than YouTube. But welcome, Rumble viewers. Now, the first myth often is told, I have often encountered this with agents. They want you to be a big name first. They want to see your social media presence and, of course, your social media ratios. Now, of course, many aspiring writers are told this, apparently, that unless you have name recognition, branding, or you're famous for something else, and we see this with reporters. After all, Hemingway was a reporter, and that gave him access to editors, not script writers, sorry, but famous people who elevated him. Plus, of course, the fact he was a British spy. Britain elevated him through their national media service, which, of course, has always been a voice of the establishment. But it seems to me, I mean, you tune into Fox. How often has somebody on Fox I don't watch that much CNN and MSNBC. I don't see it that much on every Fox show either. Again, I don't watch that much Fox. It's just, as I do research, I notice things. It just particularly stands out that some shows are designed just merely to promote. And of course, geez, wouldn't it be great to get on some of these shows? But of course, as we heard, it's pay to win. People are paying to be there, not the other way around. They're not paid contributors. They're paying to be there. The notion that everybody on Fox or CNN or a dozen other places are paid contributors, that is wrong. It's often the other way around. These big media conglomerates don't make money because they pay politicians or actors or writers to promote their stuff on the show. It's the other way around. Publishers are always looking for new talent because some of their old talent is drying up. That's a fact. But as previous guests have said, sometimes it's talent, sometimes it's luck, but it often requires both. But it's important to remember, for every big name writer, they started as a somebody and often started as a nobody. So do not be ashamed of being a nobody. Nobody's united, right? But to be honest, aren't we? Even with fame, you need talent. And everybody has what I believe talent. I don't think there are that many bad writers. It's just when you get so many good shows and things start to be 7 out of 10 and only the best rise to the ranks of television, you don't have any benchmark. You're benchmarking better shows from the past and your favorites from the past, and I guarantee you, you can go back and they're not as great as you remember. Remember your TV greats? Well, your mind has cut out the 1,000 filler episodes and crushed, the 1,000 hours of filler and crushed it down to your good feelings about hearing the jingles. The advertising jingle that often disappeared from most ads, but they remained for years after that in the background music of television shows. Most people, it's the laugh track. Your mind, after a while, forgets that you've been listening to a laugh track. It is scary how nostalgia has distorted our opinions. But with so much competition and with so few publishers, remember, publishing houses, there's a few big ones and there are many subsidiaries. And there are many fingers in many pies and crossovers and whatnot. And of course, many of us just end up self-publishing. You put your manuscript out there. We don't do science fiction. We don't do fantasy. We don't do erotica. We don't do violence. We don't. Fair enough. They know their customer base. Most publishers are looking for a shortcut. They want the shortest route between them and customers' money. They want to know that they can ship 100 books to 100 bookshops because there aren't that many bookshops. There aren't that many. Ever since the collapse of borders, and I'm not saying it's because of Harry Potter and the 100 million copies of Harry Potter they bought, but that's what I'm sticking to, no matter what anybody else says, because I was at the Sydney warehouse when they started bringing in all the Harry Potter books and called it all stamped it as unsold inventory and stacking it and stacking it and stacking it and stacking it. And just the sheer amount of other books as well on top of that. All cannot be recycled. 50 Shades of Grey, Harry Potter. It's amazing how many so-called bestsellers were all stacked to the hilt and been fed to a special. They cut off the spines, acid wash the pages. They pretty much, and it was being cut up so it could be burnt. But the stuff heavy, but they had to saturate out as much of the chemicals as possible, and that went to a separate facility to be destroyed. But for years, decades, right up and down the Australian coast, these books all piled up from around the world to be destroyed. Of course, when Australia changed its environmental regulations, they got shipped to China for their hundreds of books. It's sad. It really is. But that borders destroyed the book economy. Too many books, too cheap. $10 books, where everybody else was paying $10.50 just to print. Anything over double wide, about 2 inches thick, the publishing cost doubled. Most paperbacks this thin could be $10, but these huge books, these huge thick books. Of course, I get complaints about filler, but you go back, you see Harry Potter, the original Harry Potters, but there were a couple like this thick. They can't be the same price because the cover printing any of you self-published the cover printing, because hasn't Amazon printing actually come down? Somebody will say, yeah, there was a period where Amazon printing was very competitive, but it's slowly gone up. But it's no longer competitive for most people when it comes. You may sell your book for $10. You may make a profit, but then add the cover, add the cost of living. You're not going to make a living out of it. So now we have a threat to the economy of publishing. So, yeah, cheap books, they don't want pulp fiction, and they don't want stuff too thick. I get it. But you know what? I don't care what they want, because they're not the customer. They're not paying you much anymore. They're not paying you big. And this idea you have to be a big name, that's a myth. Now, hopefully, more self-published people start to become well-known. And that is when we are validated, and only then validated in the eyes of the general public. Until then, they will treat us like a novelty. And it's unfortunate, because I believe the vast majority of us now are self-published. Although many, as you notice, come up with their own publishing names and their own publishing companies to validate themselves. If it works for you, I guess that you do you, I guess. I'm not going to tell you not to stop doing something that's successful. I just don't know if it is successful or not. And until I know better, I will just say, if it works for you, continue doing it. But I wouldn't take the risk of spending all this money to create your own LLC at this moment. I don't think it justifies the money spent. I haven't seen any evidence that it does. But speaking of publishers, and here's the biggest problem. Say you've just finished your novel, you just finished your book, and you go to a writing group for feedback. These groups allow writers to critique each other, and you hope you get a truly objective opinion. Many will point you in the direction of at least one private professional who is well known to the group. Of course, many writing groups will have eventually end up being more writing professional editors and journalists than writers. And of course, many are also private tutors from colleges and universities looking, basically treat writing as a gig job, just like being a journalist. Journalists these days, most were journalists, they're with an agency like Reuters. They're not hired; they're paid by the article published. So, what happens? Well, you're not going to get objective feedback anymore. You're now in a pool of sharks. And so what happens is, if your friends like it, the publishers won't. Because remember, they're professionals pretending to be amateurs who know that too many books in a bookshelf means less room, means less chance that multiple copies of their book will be available on a bookshelf. You go to a bookstore, who do you want to be? The one with with a shelf of 50 books, or the guy in the back, or your book in the back? Now, of course, if you're self-published, you'd love to be the book in the back, because at least you're in a bookshop. But remember, half those books are paid to be there. The publisher is hoping that they will sell more books by providing the books to the bookstore at a discount than they do through their website. It's such a horrible game right now to be a writer, because There are too many coming at you as false friends, and so that makes it hard for it to earn your trust and earn you as an audience full time. But I'm just giving you my experience. If you've experienced differently, fantastic. Don't give up your writing group if it's good. But I'm just warning you, just because your friends like it doesn't mean the publishers. Because publishers, far too many of them, belong to subsidiaries of publishing companies, and these publishing companies are subsidiaries of mass multimedia conglomerates who merely see publishing houses as a vehicle for their journalists to gig job and a bit of an extra paycheck by writing some political bestseller, which in 6 weeks' time nobody will remember or even understand, or the thing they've wrote about is no longer the current thing, and their books go from being a bestseller to zero. Many people, of course, and this is so true of not just of identity politics, but merely when you go to a writing class, what's one of the first things they tell you? Hashtag write what you know. I always thought this was the best thing. Write what you know, because you know more about that than the subject you don't know. But are you going to write about pirates and geishas? If you're a college student in Illinois, what's your experience with space travel? Or if you're in Florida, that doesn't make you an astronaut. Or doesn't mean, or if you're an astronaut, doesn't mean you have a genie in a bottle on your shelf. And it's the same in Illinois. Doesn't mean you can't write about Canada just because you're on the other side of the border. Your winters are pretty much the same. And Chicago, the windy city, that doesn't mean you can write about cyclones, apparently, because they're a different type of wind. But I mean, if you're in a high wind area, at least that gives you some context. So how are you going to write a convincing work? Well, what we do, research, right? Positivity. Yeah, we all experience happiness, sadness, haughtiness, irritations, allergies. Even many of us say, oh, I'm not allergic. And then suddenly you get a change of season and everybody's sniffing and sniffling and thinking it's the cold. But it's actually, it's your body adjusting to the change of seasons. You're suddenly adjusting to the high pollen, or some people get spring. They do get allergies and an itchy nose more often than not. But there are things that everybody's allergic to, like the negative reaction to bad smells. And I wouldn't exactly call it but let's see. Can a fantasy writer write horror? Of course. Doesn't mean you like horror. Some of the best horror writers are just writers. Some of the best. Look at Hollywood professionals. They don't have a genre. They have tropes. They want to write for a particular movie, for a particular set of characters. They have the tropes. They just go with what they know. They're well educated. They're overworked, underpaid, and underappreciated, but still, they don't exactly practice magic, at least that I know of. They're not demonically possessed that I know of. They don't travel to work in a hover car that I know of. They don't carry lightsabers and have Imperial Stormtrooper armor in their closet. Well, some might, but that doesn't make them Imperial Stormtroopers. some of them write horror stories. That doesn't mean they're skeletons walking around making bad puns like the Crypt Keeper or driving demonically possessed cars that I know of. But writing can be sourced from fact or emotion. And the idea, particularly as we go back to world building, is you want to world build factually in relevance to the scene to give context, but you want the world to be interesting. So you have to have it delightful, exciting, sometimes even in the cruelest of moments, a touch of beauty. Schindler's List, not exactly glowing recommendations for its color palette. Definitely not it's a very serious subject matter and very depressing movie at times. But there is a award-winning scene for emotion, and that is the girl in the red dress. Most people can't remember the scene, but they'll remember, oh yes, the girl in the red dress. The girl in the red dress went on to actually survive the war. She was her life saved by a SS guard who took her hostage to get through the American lines, thinking that, but they surrounded him and he handed her over, and he went to jail for life, I believe, and she immigrated to Australia. Now, she gave her life story for an undisclosed sum to Thomas Keneally, who further researched the story. Now, I don't think Keneally actually recognized her or many of the others who survived the horrors. But when it comes to writing what you know, Thomas Keneally wasn't an SS guard, as far as I know, or involved in World War II, as far as I know. So are you telling me that Thomas Keneally shouldn't have written Schindler's List? So even I, at times, have fallen for that mistake that so often, so many writing lessons start with write what you know. And yet I've read Schindler's List, I've seen the movie, I've met people who survived Auschwitz and told about the story. Thomas Keneally, I didn't get to meet him at the when I went to the to Melbourne writing festival. I've only been once. I wish I'd gone multiple times. I wish I had. I've done a lot of things sooner, particularly writing sooner. But how do you know what's good advice and bad advice? Well, unfortunately, you have to do what works for you. What works for me may not work for you. And of course, I'd love to share what works for you too. But I don't know everybody and I don't know everything. I just hope to improve my writing through reaching others. And you help me, I help you, and I help you. You know, rising boats, all right. Oh, boats rise together. Sorry. But here's the worst thing that I've ever been told. My book isn't the hottest topic of the day. Today's hottest genres don't always stay the hottest genres. People don't know this, but there's a time that you couldn't sell Star Wars books. There have been many dead patches in Star Wars. There have been many genres, horror, up and down. Some low-budget horror movies. Oh, we made 400 times our original budget. What was your original budget? $1,000? But no, yeah. Most, just kidding, you know, it's exaggeration, but, you know, 10 times their initial budget. I think the highest was like 26. Apparently, to be a hot writer, to be in the draw of millions of readers, you have to download a template, create your characters, use Scene Creator and other AI tools, Designer, feed everything in through a ChatGPT plugin, and lo and behold, when you're finished, you submit it through experts. The day's hottest topic will get you top sales, top positions, keyword searches, all the things that they'll sell you, all these packages, $27 a month, $57 a month, $129 a year, $27 only. Hit now, click, 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 click. $27 lifetime guaranteed. There are just so many. How to write the hottest romance, the steamiest erotica, the most fantastical science fiction, and all the other things that most of these ads are now AI tailored through hashtags and Facebook advertising and Google and all these other. They look at the tags you use, the people you associate with, the topics you print about, and they tailor the ads to you. So they're going to tell you the hottest genre, and experts will try to sell you packages, but these are all, you ask yourself, how these are all just lurks by big corporations with their multiple subsidiaries to pump out endless cash flow, AI tools, whatever. They don't produce books. If they really, really, really had today's hottest genre, today's latest thing, if they knew the next big hot topic, they're publishers. They wouldn't publish garbage courses. The problem is, let's say I built a reputation and started selling you courses. Unfortunately, I'll probably have more chance of making $1 million selling courses on the hottest genre topics on Instagram than I do anything else. I'd invest in a suit, some gold jewelry, makeup artists, and all these things. Do a studio, do AI scripts, and hawk all these $27 tools. And unfortunately, I'm more likely to make money than the so-called hottest genre. Because remember, it's not the hottest genre. It's the best writer in that genre at the time whose book just made a bestseller, and the media make a blitz campaign because it's all pay to win. Big publishers can afford the $400,000, $500,000 advertising campaigns that keep them on the front page of Amazon. And amazingly, they're spending a $400,000 advertising campaign to sell you a book at a $2 book. Why? Because the sequels are 11, then 15, then 27, then 34 for the hardback special edition. And they'll sell you the audio book for $3.34, and it costs them nothing to produce because it's all AI. The author gets nothing because the author got a pre-front loaded. They have to overcome so much to make money. Remember, most of the people on the shelf. I mean, where's Russell Brand? Amazingly, you think if it's not just Russell Brand, there are many, many, many other writers and career artists. I mean, again, I don't knock Russell Brand for writing a book, but he treated writing a book like a gig job and made some money out of it. But Not a lot. In the end, it didn't. In the end, it cost the publisher more for the advertising campaign than it did for what he made. And eventually his book faded into the background, and they just said politely, don't write another one. But when I'm just trying to make the point that the hottest genre is not exactly, depends on you. If you become the hot topic, they'll off hot topics and top genres and top sales and popular. They're treating writing like a popularity contest, and unfortunately, it's becoming a popularity contest. And I'm not knocking people for being good looking, but you're not talented because you're good looking. It just helps the fact that people overlook your faults everywhere else. And I mean, I know what it's like to be older, and I know what it's like. I still remember when I was young and popular. If I'd written a book then, I probably would have found it much easier to gain an audience and to gain viewers, particularly when you are, I suppose, popular or pretty, both, admired, respected. But again, it's not because you're talented. It's, of course, again, I say most writers I've come across, they're talented. But when the sea of talent is so vast and wide, all it means is the great number of us who can't afford the pay-to-win marketing strategy that has taken over writing. And I bring this up often. Why? Because one of the biggest myths is even if you get a publication deal, most people think your work is done. Write a book, give it to a publisher. It's the story you love. It's the story the publisher wants. It's just phase one. Writing fiction that sells is a game. Some think it's going to be, some people look at Harry Potter and says, wow, that genre, $1 billion, got children reading again. That means children's books are going to sell. Did any other children's book come after that, become a bestseller, an instant success, a massive wave of popularity? No, created a hardcore set of fans whose only book they've read is Harry Potter. And that's scary. They haven't even read the sequels. They've seen the movies. They read one book and they saw the movies. That's scary. No, I don't mean every Harry Potter head is like that. I'm just saying there's a big chunk of people, according to analysis. You look at the fall off after each movie. There's clearly a big chunk, 100 million people who bought her books, but a greater number saw the movies. But again, was there any competition at the time? Now but was any book after that sold? And you've got to ask yourself, what happened? Well, she didn't just publish a book. She was friends with the head of a department within the BBC, and the next thing you know, she's on a talk show. Stephen Fry is tweeting her, and suddenly more and more people are booking her to do talk shows and rounds, and next thing you know, Disney's flying her out to America to talk about a deal, and for some reason she's called by Warner and outbidded by Disney, and that following the announcement, the British government are building this Harry Potter park, and it just exploded from there. Your work is not done. It's promotion. Now, I gave you an example of promotion that exploded. You've never seen anything before that or since, and that's why it's a bad example, but it's the only example I can really show you that really hammers home the effect that just because you've written a book doesn't mean your work's done. And particularly with publishers, they will only pay for so many advertisers. They will pay. They want to put the book out at 35, discounted to 27, and put big flashing label over X many sold, or this prize, or whatever. A lot of these prizes, again, pay to win. You've got to pay to enter. You got to do book tours. You got to often have to collaborate with editors and publishers and advertisers. This all costs money. The publisher isn't. These days, a lot of publishers aren't putting up the full price anymore. They're not paying you a huge advance either. Here's the problem. It comes back to the editing process. You may have to cut out large sections. You may have to add a lot of filler. You have to meet a certain print range for the price. If the price they're aiming at, what the current market sales are. So again, character cuttings, meaning ESG, these are real concerns now, that you may have to change the plot to be modern, even though you're writing a historical piece. That is a reality now. There are so many realities in the fiction writing process that that you can go for months rewriting the works, and you go from development, your book's finished. Yep. Nope. Starting again. Development. Here's your team of 5 plucky teenagers. It's an Agatha Christie novel style mystery. She's a middle-aged. Nope. She's a 16-year-old plucky woman of color, recent arrival from Jamaica in London, and she's a university graduate in gender studies, and she has pink hair, and it goes on from there, folks. And if you don't think that happens, wait until you meet some of these publishing companies, I tell you. And they're passionate. They're passionate about making money. They're not passionate about the topics. They're just reading off the hot topics list. What's going to make us sell today? They expect your book to be written. They expect you to put in 24 hours. They expect you to have social media presence, hashtags. What are your hashtags? What are your past tweets? How many followers do you have? So your work's not done. You've got to push your book, do interviews, be prepared to do live interviews. You have to sit at desks at libraries for hours per day with nobody coming and going. You have to go to book fairs and show up at festivals, and it just keeps going. And you have to buy so many copies of your own book to lug around. And you have to have more copies on hand for signings, because you have to have these huge stacks and every day you take a few boxes home just to make it look like your stacks are going down. It's about building perception. And the publishers are telling you every step of the way without giving you any backup in it. And when things go wrong, they just say, oh, you missed the wave. You missed the boat. Maybe next time we'll go with rewrite it, make it a trilogy. We'll see what happens. How many YA trilogies are out there now? How many have the most ludicrous of premises? How many of those writers? I mean, 50 Shades of Grey isn't a YA, but I can't think of right now. But they're all pen names, and they're all former screenwriters. And so many are BBC screenwriters because it's a gig job to them. Oh, I'm a screenwriter. Oh, I need a gig job. I need some money. I'll publish a book because the company will push it for me for next to nothing. And people who want to become writers often try to get into the media companies to become a script writer. So of course you're now in the sharks pool because you have all the experienced writers. Now, of course, you have the other direction. You have writers who become school teachers, English teachers, college professors. I believe Stephen King was an English teacher. I believe you have Tolkien, who was an English professor. And actually, the cliche, the English professor writing a book, actually isn't so-called the great American novelist. Actually, the great American novelist tends to more be the Hemingway type, and yet he was English originally. But Hemingway was a journalist, and a lot of American writers are journalists, and a lot of British writers are either professors or script writers for the BBC. It's like, although there's a few probably ITVs and that as well, but it's sad when you get behind the screen and realize that being just a guy from the north side of Sydney doesn't sound sexy or cool or interesting to the public. And it's sad because where I was born, the color of my skin, the sound of my voice, the color of my hair, the color of my eyes, the fact that I'm old, the color of my that I wear glasses should not matter to my books. The book matters. Your book matters. Remember, my book is only going to impact somebody's life for a week. Every week, somebody should be every week I try to read. Everybody should be reading at least once a week. Just because I read once a week doesn't mean I read a book every week, but at least try once a week to read, even if it's an hour or two a day. And I own now digital copies only. I used to have thousands of books, but I live in a small place now. So I have thousands of digital copies of books that I've read in the past, books that I'll probably never get to read. I don't have that much time in life. But sometimes, it just happens, get a book. I'll read this. This looks interesting. I'm not going to say which I didn't like and dislike. I've hardly given reviews because most of the time it's refused. I recently gave somebody a review and Amazon took days and days and days before they accepted it. Other times I've written people reviews and it hasn't been accepted. That's the way it goes. And you end up still, if I get a review copy, I'll do a review. I'll do my honest best. I can't, however, I'm stacked up at the moment. And I've got more books to read than I can already read now. So, but I'll try. And I'll try my best. But when it comes to what the publisher wants, change the plot slightly. Be more action. Too much action. Not enough action. Not enough romance. too much romance. It's always a changing process, and they'll remind you that they're the experts, they're the publisher, they know best. Even when they fail, it's your failure, not mine, and you have to put up with their crap. Now, of course, there is the bestseller lists. Unfortunately, those lists are restrictive to certain publishers, often restricted to American authors, even though they claim they're not. Often restricted to people who meet USA Today or New York Times standards, which often means American. It's often submitted books. So if Amazon doesn't submit you, you don't get on that list, even though you could outsell somebody. There have been books on that list that didn't exactly sell, but they sold after. No, I'm not accusing everybody of corruption. I'm just saying that there have been numerous complaints. And I'm sorry if I burst your bubble and you don't like what I have to say, but it's unfortunate, and it seems clear to many people that this is a pay-to-win gig job. And I don't like that it's a gig job. I like writing. And I want to unburden myself of the gatekeepers in the industry who want books to be factory produced, more of the same, YA protagonist that meets the current political climate, determined by the very people at the top who do trend analysis and say, well, we haven't had a purple head protagonist who's from, we've got Jamaica. Oh, look, the Jamaica craze is wearing off. Quick! Oh, the Mozambique tourist organizations offering us money. We'll go with them. We don't know much of the behind the scenes goings on, but we know that the current thing is the thing that they push. Buzzwords, hot topics, you name it. Burden. I just want to write what I like, and I want what I write to be me. I want to be genuine. I want the science fantasy experience to be a world of hope and wonder, even when things are down and depressing and when all hope is lost, and strive for victory and all that. And I don't want to be trapped in grimdark, or I know there's an audience for grimdark. I know the problem with grimdark is it becomes permanent failure. There's no you give somebody victory, they want the next book to be a big rug pull, or it's a trap. So you become grimdark is one of the genres, I believe, that becomes like horror, to some extent erotica and fantasy, where you become a prisoner of your audience. That if you deviate from the set tropes. Now, of course, I don't like the 5. actually a lot of time you don't see much. The 5-man squad, in reality, I don't see much of it. Yet that seems to be one of the myths, that the 5-man squad, I don't remember that many, anything lately that I can point to and say, yeah, it's a good example of the 5-man squad. I mean, Star Trek was 3. Next Gen was 13, but it varied. It was more like 9 rotated. Well, it was more like 26 rotated to about 5 or 6 per episode. The books was a bit further out. Star Wars often was the solo protagonist, or a handful. So, and the 5 were never together all at any one time. I mean, I read a Star Wars novel recently, and it had Lando on one side of the universe and chasing down this alien ship, and he's talking in real time to Han Solo on the other side of the universe while he's trying to smuggle fuel out of. Why is they always portray Han Solo as smuggling fuel? I never know. And why is Han Solo smuggling fuel in an old freighter and Lando running around in the Millennium Falcon? And I thought Han Solo was dead. And it's like, oh. But then again, a lot of these books aren't dated, so maybe it's just when it came out, it was. Of course, authors are allowed to do that. I like the story anyway, but I spent half the book going waiting for Luke to come in. What's Chewbacca doing other than co-piloting? Stuck in a genre. There's a myth. Stuck in a genre. Let's say you start off and you're writing science fiction and you don't originally have horror elements. That doesn't mean in future stories you cannot introduce horror, comedy, romance, or mystery. Though, coming to a point about sequels, you don't always have to write a sequel. You don't always have to write a trilogy. I think the popularity of trilogies, I mean, Douglas Adams did it, a couple of others did it, where they wrote a trilogy and then broke the mold and added books to their trilogy. I think ended up with 6 with Douglas Adams. And I don't think his detective agency trilogy ever panned out. Oh, no, that's right. It was the trilogy. It was 3 stories in one or something. And then he did, he did other works as well, but never lived long enough to achieve the rest, or I don't know anymore. I don't want to harp on too much longer about it. It's just, you do you. And if the publishers like it and publish it for you, then I have no experience with publishers beyond the negatives to pass on to you, to tell you whether they're not to your advantage or not. But I've had a few people ask me why I'm not published. And the answer is they never get back to me. I do not know. I do know that a book agents, an agency, Inspire, told me to get 400,000 followers. So here I am. Please like, share, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. Thank you all for listening. I know the vast majority of you are going to tune in later through the week. I wish you all the best. I sincerely mean that. I don't want authors who go through the trouble of writing a book to fail. Just to me, however, failing is letting others control your work. I believe everybody's success is different measures, but to me, right now, I think failure is stopping. Failure is letting others control your work. Failure is letting media pressure and activists who don't buy your books to control your work. If they want blue-haired, purple ants the size of Manhattan threatening the city and having a plucky 16-year-old black girl save the day, write that book. Don't make others write that book. I want diversity in the books I read. I don't want to read every book the same, where the same protagonist is fighting the same enemy at the same time in the different, and it's just over and over the same thing. No, I truly want diversity in my reading. I don't want the same outcomes, the same people, the same mishmash of 5 cast herds. Even cast herds, I try to rotate my cast, and I try to do my best to ensure that the main characters are the main characters and the rest are not. But you do your style, and thank you all for listening, and I'll see you all on the other side.